Sarah Martinez had heard the whispers her entire career. 28 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and weighing barely 130 pounds, she didn't look like what most people expected from a police sharpshooter. The comments followed her through the academy, into her first patrol assignment, and now into the elite tactical unit where she had finally earned her place. "She's too small," Detective Ray Morrison had muttered during her first week with the SWAT team. "What happens when she needs to carry heavy equipment? What if she has to drag a wounded officer to safety?" Sarah pretended not to hear, just like she had pretended not to notice the rolled eyes when she qualified at the top of her sniper class. Just like she ignored the skeptical looks when she arrived at crime scenes with her German Shepherd partner, Rex. The 90-pound black and tan dog had become her constant companion, both on duty and off. But even Rex couldn't escape the criticism. "A pretty girl with a pretty dog," Officer Jenkins had commented last month. "Looks good for the department photos, but can she handle real police work?" The Riverside Police Department had been progressive in many ways. They were among the first departments in the state to integrate K-9 units with tactical teams, and they had supported Sarah's specialized training in both marksmanship and K-9 handling. But progress on paper didn't always translate to acceptance in the field. Captain Williams had been her strongest supporter from the beginning. A 30-year veteran with graying temples and kind eyes, he recognized talent when he saw it. During Sarah's interview for the tactical unit, he had asked her directly about the challenges she expected to face. "Sir, I know people have doubts," Sarah had answered honestly. "They see my size and think I'm not cut out for this work. But shooting isn't about muscle mass. It's about breathing, focus, and reading the environment. As for handling difficult situations, that's exactly why I train with Rex. We work as a team." The captain had nodded thoughtfully. "What makes you think you can succeed where others might doubt you?" "Because I've been proving myself my entire life, sir. My father was a Marine sniper in Afghanistan. He taught me that success comes from preparation, patience, and precision, not from trying to be the loudest or strongest person in the room." That conversation had taken place 8 months ago. Since then, Sarah and Rex had been deployed on dozens of operations. They had provided overwatch during drug raids, tracked suspects through dense woods, and assisted in several hostage situations. But they had never been the primary response team for a major incident. The department's tactical unit operated out of a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building housed their training facilities, equipment storage, and briefing rooms. Sarah arrived early every morning, using the extra time to work with Rex on scent detection and obedience drills. The dog was exceptional, intelligent, focused, and completely devoted to his handler. Rex had been specially trained for dual purposes. Like traditional police dogs, he could track suspects, detect drugs and explosives, and apprehend dangerous individuals. But his training went beyond typical K-9 work. He had been conditioned to work silently during sniper operations, to remain perfectly still for hours at a time, and to alert Sarah to threats she might not notice while focused through her scope. The partnership had taken 2 years to develop. Sarah had worked with 3 different dogs before finding Rex, and even then, their bond hadn't been immediate. The breakthrough had come during a training exercise in the mountains. Sarah had been positioned on a ridge, providing simulated cover fire for a team advancing through a valley below. Rex had been lying beside her, as still as a statue, when he suddenly tensed. The dog's ears had perked up, and his nose had begun working the air. Without making a sound, he had shifted position to look down the ridge to their left. Sarah had followed his gaze through her binoculars and spotted 2 instructors trying to sneak up on their position. The exercise had been designed to test her awareness, but Rex had passed the test for both of them. From that moment, they had truly become a team. Sarah learned to read Rex's body language as clearly as she read wind patterns and range estimates. The dog learned to communicate without barking, using subtle movements and positioning to convey information to his handler. Their success in training had translated to success in the field, but not without continued skepticism from some of their colleagues. The comments had become less frequent, but hadn't disappeared entirely. Sarah knew that some officers viewed her and Rex as a publicity stunt, a way for the department to appear modern and inclusive without making real changes. The truth was more complicated. Chief Patterson genuinely believed in community policing and innovative approaches to law enforcement. He had seen departments across the country struggle with public trust, and he wanted Riverside to be different. But he also understood that change was difficult, especially in a profession built on tradition and hierarchy. Sarah's assignment to the tactical unit had been controversial within the department. Two male officers with more seniority had applied for the same position, and both had filed grievances when Sarah was selected. The review process had taken 4 months, during which Sarah had continued her regular patrol duties while wondering if her career advancement would be derailed by politics. The review board had ultimately supported Captain Williams' decision, citing Sarah's superior marksmanship scores, her specialized K-9 training, and her performance evaluations. But the process had created lasting resentment among some officers who felt that standards had been lowered to accommodate diversity goals. Detective Morrison was among the most vocal critics, though he was careful to frame his objections in terms of operational effectiveness rather than gender bias. He argued that tactical units required officers who could perform multiple roles, that a sniper who couldn't also serve as an entry team member was a luxury the department couldn't afford. It's not personal, Morrison had explained to anyone who would listen. It's about resource allocation. We have limited slots on the tactical team, and every member needs to pull their weight. Captain Williams had countered that specialized skills were exactly what modern police work required. We don't expect our computer crimes detective to also work narcotics, he had pointed out during one heated staff meeting. Why should we expect our best marksman to also be our best door kicker? The debate reflected larger tensions within law enforcement about the direction of policing in the 21st century. Traditional officers like Morrison believed that police work required physical presence and the ability to impose order through strength and authority. Younger officers like Sarah represented a different approach, one that emphasized precision, technology, and specialized training over brute force. Rex himself had become part of this philosophical divide. Traditional police dogs were trained primarily for intimidation and apprehension. They were large, aggressive animals that could subdue suspects and protect their handlers in physical confrontations. Rex was different, smaller than typical police dogs, trained for stealth and observation rather than attack. Some officers questioned whether Rex could be effective in a real crisis. During training exercises, he had proven his worth repeatedly. He could track suspects across difficult terrain, detect hidden weapons or explosives, and provide early warning of threats. But he had never been tested in a genuine life-or-death situation. Sarah understood the concerns, even if she disagreed with them. Police work was inherently unpredictable, and officers needed to trust their partners completely. Building that trust took time, especially when the partnership challenged conventional assumptions about how police work should be done. The morning shift briefing was held in the main conference room at 7 a.m. sharp. Captain Williams reviewed overnight incidents, shared intelligence updates, and made duty assignments for the day. Sarah and Rex usually received routine assignments, providing security at public events, assisting with warrant services, or conducting training demonstrations for other departments. But this morning felt different. Captain Williams had arrived earlier than usual, and he had spent 30 minutes in closed-door meetings with senior staff. When the briefing began, his demeanor was more serious than normal. "We have a developing situation in the industrial district," he announced without preamble. "Intelligence suggests that the Valdez organization is planning something significant today. We don't have specifics, but multiple sources indicate increased activity around their warehouse operations." The Valdez organization was Riverside's most significant criminal enterprise. Led by Marcus Valdez, a former military contractor turned drug trafficker, the group had expanded rapidly over the past 2 years. They were known for sophisticated operations, military-style planning, and a willingness to use violence against law enforcement. "Patrol units will maintain normal coverage throughout the city," Captain Williams continued. "But I want tactical teams ready for rapid deployment. We may need to respond quickly if the situation develops." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness. Major operations were rare, and she had never been assigned to anything involving the Valdez organization. Most of her tactical deployments had been relatively routine, serving high-risk warrants, or providing security for dignitary visits. After the briefing, she spent time reviewing intelligence files on the Valdez Group. The organization was more militarized than typical criminal enterprises. Marcus Valdez had served 2 tours in Iraq before starting his security consulting business. When that business failed, he had used his military contacts to establish a drug trafficking operation that spanned 3 states. The group's members were predominantly military veterans, many with combat experience. They used military communications equipment, surveillance techniques, and tactical planning. Previous law enforcement operations against them had been costly and dangerous, resulting in several officer injuries and limited arrests. Sarah studied photographs of known Valdez associates, memorizing faces and identifying characteristics. She reviewed floor plans of their known properties and analyzed previous law enforcement encounters with the group. Knowledge was power in tactical situations, and she wanted to be prepared for any scenario. Rex seemed to sense her heightened alertness. The dog remained close to her side throughout the morning, occasionally nudging her hand with his nose as if to remind her of his presence. Their bond had grown so strong that they could communicate without words, each responding to subtle changes in the other's mood and body language. Around noon, the first reports began coming in. Patrol units noticed unusual activity around several Valdez-controlled properties. Vehicles were moving between locations, and surveillance teams reported seeing armed individuals positioning themselves around the warehouse district. Captain Williams called an emergency briefing for all tactical personnel. When Sarah and Rex entered the conference room, she noticed the tension immediately. Officers were checking equipment, reviewing maps, and speaking in hushed tones. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough to mobilize the entire unit. Intelligence indicates that the Valdez organization is planning to move a major shipment today, the captain announced. We believe they're consolidating their operations to prevent law enforcement interference. This could be our best opportunity to disrupt their network significantly. He outlined the preliminary plan. Multiple teams would be positioned around the industrial district, ready to respond when the situation developed. Sarah and Rex were assigned to overwatch duty, positioned on a building that would give them sight lines to several potential target locations. Remember, Captain Williams emphasized, we're dealing with trained military personnel. These aren't street dealers or amateur criminals. They have the skills and equipment to mount serious resistance. Stay alert, follow protocols, and don't take unnecessary risks. As the meeting concluded, Sarah noticed several colleagues looking in her direction. Some expressions showed concern, genuine worry for her safety in a potentially dangerous situation. Others showed skepticism, doubt about whether she and Rex were ready for this level of threat. Detective Morrison approached her as she gathered her equipment. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked quietly. "This isn't a training exercise. These guys don't care that you qualified at the top of sniper school." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm ready," she replied simply. "Rex and I have trained for exactly this type of situation." Morrison nodded slowly. "Just remember, if things go sideways, call for backup immediately. Don't try to be a hero." The comment stung because Sarah detected an assumption that she might act recklessly to prove herself. But she also recognized genuine concern in Morrison's voice. Despite their differences, he was a good cop who cared about officer safety. Loading her equipment into the tactical van, Sarah performed final checks on her rifle, communications gear, and surveillance equipment. Rex jumped into the vehicle beside her, settling immediately into his traveling position. They had done this routine hundreds of times in training, but today felt different. Today might be the day when all their preparation would be tested under real-world conditions. As they drove toward their assigned position, Sarah thought about her father's words from years earlier. "The mark of a professional isn't never feeling nervous," he had told her. "It's feeling nervous and doing your job anyway. Fear keeps you alert. Overconfidence gets you killed." The industrial district came into view through the van's windows, a maze of warehouses, loading docks, and narrow streets. Somewhere in that maze, the Valdez organization was preparing for something big. And somewhere in that same maze, Sarah and Rex would prove whether the doubters had been right to question their readiness for real police work. The observation post was a 6-story office building that had been abandoned for 2 years. The elevator didn't work, So Sarah and Rex climbed the concrete stairs to the roof, carrying 60 pounds of equipment between them. The dog bounded up the steps with ease, while Sarah felt her heart rate increase from both exertion and anticipation. The rooftop provided an excellent vantage point over the industrial district. Sarah could see the Valdez organization's primary warehouse 3 blocks away, along with 2 smaller buildings that intelligence had identified as storage facilities. Setting up her position took 20 minutes. Assembling the spotting scope, arranging camouflage netting, and testing communications equipment. Rex took his position beside her without being told. The dog had been trained to remain motionless for hours at a time, but he was never truly inactive. His ears constantly rotated to track sounds, his nose worked the air currents, and his eyes scanned the surrounding area for movement. He was Sarah's early warning system, capable of detecting threats she might miss while focused through her scope. Overwatch 1 in position, Sarah reported through her radio. Clear sight lines to primary target and both secondary locations. Copy, Overwatch 1. Came Captain Williams' voice through her earpiece. Maintain observation and report any activity. The first hour passed quietly. Sarah watched through her scope as workers moved around the warehouse district, following what appeared to be normal routines. Delivery trucks came and went from several buildings, and she could see pedestrians walking along the sidewalks below. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But Rex was restless. The dog kept shifting position slightly, his attention focused on something Sarah couldn't identify. She had learned to trust his instincts completely, so she expanded her observation pattern to include areas the dog seemed interested in. At 1:47 p.m., she spotted the first sign of unusual activity. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to a building 2 blocks from the main warehouse. 3 men got out, all wearing dark clothing and moving with the kind of disciplined coordination that suggested military training. They weren't workers or casual visitors. Overwatch 1 to command, Sarah reported. 3 military-age males just arrived at the secondary storage facility. Possible weapons visible under their clothing. Copy. Continue observation. Over the next 30 minutes, similar vehicles arrived at locations throughout the district. Sarah counted at least 15 men who clearly weren't ordinary warehouse workers. They moved with purpose, maintained tactical spacing, and several carried equipment bags that could easily contain weapons or communications gear. Rex suddenly stiffened beside her, his ears pointing toward a building directly below their position. Sarah adjusted her scope and spotted movement on a rooftop across the street. 2 figures in dark clothing were setting up what looked like surveillance equipment, but their positioning gave them clear sight lines to police staging areas 6 blocks away. Command, this is Overwatch 1. I have enemy surveillance teams establishing positions. They're watching our staging areas. There was a long pause before Captain Williams responded. Are you certain they're hostile surveillance? Sarah studied the figures through her scope. Both men wore tactical gear, carried military-style radios, and had positioned themselves to observe police movements while remaining hidden from street-level view. One was using binoculars to scan the area where tactical units were assembling. Positive identification, she confirmed. 2-man surveillance team, approximately 400 meters southeast of my position. They have direct observation of our staging area. Can you neutralize the threat? The question hung in the air for several seconds. Sarah understood what was being asked. Could she take out the surveillance team with her sniper rifle? The distance was well within her capabilities, and both targets were clearly visible. But shooting suspects who hadn't fired first went against every principle of police engagement. Negative on direct action, she replied. No immediate threat to officer safety. Recommend surveillance countermeasures. She was relieved when Captain Williams agreed. Copy. We'll reposition staging areas. Continue observation. But the surveillance team had confirmed Sarah's growing suspicion that the Valdez organization was conducting a planned operation, not simply moving drugs or money. They had positioned lookouts to monitor police response, which suggested they expected law enforcement interference. This wasn't routine criminal activity, it was a military-style mission. At 2:15 p.m., the situation escalated dramatically. Sarah spotted armed figures taking positions around the main warehouse. They weren't trying to hide their weapons anymore, and their movements had the coordinated precision of soldiers preparing for battle. Command, this is Overwatch 1. I count at least 8 armed hostiles establishing defensive positions around the primary target. This looks like preparation for armed resistance. Copy. All units, be advised that suspects are armed and taking defensive positions. Rex had been lying motionless beside Sarah for over 2 hours, but now he raised his head and looked directly at her. The dog's expression was alert and focused, and Sarah could see tension in his body language that suggested he sensed danger. Following Rex's gaze, Sarah scanned the area below their building. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then, movement in an alley caught her attention. 3 men in tactical gear were approaching the abandoned office building from different directions. They were trying to stay hidden, moving from cover to cover, but Rex had detected them before they came into Sarah's field of view. Command, I have a problem, Sarah reported quietly. 3 hostiles approaching my position. They may have spotted our observation post. Can you relocate? Sarah considered the options quickly. The stairwell they had used to reach the roof was the only way down, and it was directly in the path of the approaching men. Moving across the rooftop would make her visible to other surveillance teams. Rex could probably escape by jumping between buildings, but Sarah couldn't follow that route with her equipment. Negative on relocation. We're trapped up here. The radio crackled with multiple voices as units tried to coordinate a response, but Sarah knew that backup was at least 10 minutes away. The men approaching the building would reach the roof in half that time. She and Rex would have to handle the situation alone. Rex, quiet, she whispered, and the dog immediately flattened himself against the rooftop. Sarah began breaking down her observation equipment, keeping only her rifle and essential gear. If they were going to move, they needed to travel light. Through her earpiece, she could hear radio traffic as other units reported increasing activity throughout the district. The Bravettes organization was implementing some kind of coordinated plan, and eliminating the police observation post was apparently part of that plan. Sarah made a quick decision. Instead of waiting passively for the approaching men to reach the roof, she would take the initiative. Moving to the stairwell entrance, she positioned herself to have a clear field of fire down the concrete steps. Rex took position beside her, ready to follow her lead. The first man appeared at the 4th floor landing, moving carefully up the stairs with his weapon ready. Sarah could see him clearly through her rifle scope, a Hispanic male in his 30s, wearing tactical gear and carrying an assault rifle. Behind him, she could hear at least 2 more sets of footsteps. Police, stop where you are, Sarah shouted down the stairwell. Instead of complying, the man immediately raised his weapon and began firing up the stairway. Concrete chips flew from the walls around Sarah's position as bullets ricocheted off the stairs and ceiling. She pulled back from the stairwell entrance as more gunfire erupted from below. Shots fired. Shots fired. Sarah reported into her radio while bullets continued striking the area around her position. 3 hostiles in the stairwell, attempting to reach the roof. Rex remained perfectly calm despite the gunfire echoing through the building. The dog had been trained to work in combat environments, and loud noises didn't distract him from his mission. He watched Sarah intently, waiting for her command. The gunfire stopped temporarily as the attackers reloaded or repositioned. Sarah used the brief pause to assess her situation. She could hear voices below, speaking in Spanish and coordinating their advance. They knew exactly where she was positioned, and they were planning to rush her position. Rex, search, Sarah whispered. The dog immediately began moving along the rooftop perimeter, using his superior hearing and scent detection to locate any additional threats. Within seconds, he returned to Sarah's position and indicated the roof access door that led to the building's main stairwell. Someone else was coming up the other stairway. Now Sarah understood the tactical situation. The first group was keeping her pinned down with gunfire, while a second group flanked her position using the building's other stairwell. In minutes, she would be caught between 2 groups of armed attackers with nowhere to retreat. The radio chattered with reports from across the district. Other police units were under attack simultaneously, confirming that this was a coordinated assault on law enforcement positions. The Bravettes organization had apparently decided to eliminate police surveillance before proceeding with their main operation. Sarah moved to a position where she could watch both stairwell entrances while remaining behind cover. Rex positioned himself to guard her blind spots. his ears tracking sounds she couldn't hear. The partnership they had developed over 2 years was being tested under conditions they had only simulated in training. The sound of footsteps grew louder from both directions. Sarah estimated that the first group would reach the roof in less than a minute, while the flanking group was only slightly behind them. She had perhaps 30 seconds to decide how to handle multiple armed attackers approaching her position simultaneously. Through her earpiece, she heard Captain Williams coordinating response units throughout the district. All teams, reports of coordinated attacks on police positions. Priority is officer safety. Fall back to secure positions and await backup. But Sarah couldn't fall back. She was trapped on a rooftop with nowhere to retreat, facing military-trained attackers who had superior numbers and positioning. Everything she had trained for was about to be tested in the next few minutes. Rex looked at her expectantly, waiting for instructions. The dog's calm confidence helped steady Sarah's nerves. They had prepared for exactly this type of situation, even if she had hoped they would never face it in reality. Now all their training and partnership would be put to the ultimate test. The footsteps were getting closer from both directions. Sarah took a deep breath, checked her rifle one final time, and prepared to show everyone who had doubted her capabilities exactly what she and Rex could accomplish when their backs were against the wall. "Command," she reported quietly into her radio. "Overwatch 1 is about to be overrun. We'll attempt to neutralize threats and maintain position." She didn't wait for a response. The first attacker was already visible at the top of the stairs, and the real battle was about to begin. The first attacker emerged from the stairwell with his assault rifle raised, scanning the rooftop for Sarah's position. He was well-trained, moving with the fluid precision of someone who had cleared buildings under fire before. But his training hadn't prepared him for Rex. The German Shepherd had positioned himself in the shadows near the stairwell entrance, invisible to someone focused on finding Sarah's sniper position. As the attacker stepped onto the rooftop, Rex struck without warning. 90 pounds of muscle and bone hit the man from the side, driving him to the ground before he could bring his weapon to bear. The attack happened in complete silence. Rex had been trained to disable threats without barking or growling that might alert other enemies. The attacker's rifle clattered across the concrete as he struggled with the dog, but his shouts were muffled by Rex's grip on his throat. Sarah used the distraction to shift position, moving to a spot where she could see the second stairwell while keeping the first one covered. Through her scope, she spotted the second attacker reaching the roof level. He was more cautious than his partner, using the doorframe for cover while he surveyed the rooftop. The sound of his partner's struggle with Rex had alerted him that something was wrong, but he couldn't see what had happened from his position. Sarah watched him through her scope, waiting for him to expose enough of his body to give her a clean shot. Rex had disabled the first attacker completely. The man was unconscious, either from lack of oxygen or from hitting his head on the concrete. The dog immediately released his grip and moved back towards Sarah, ready for the next threat. His training had taught him to neutralize one enemy quickly and then return to his handler for further instructions. The second attacker finally stepped from cover, sweeping his rifle across the rooftop as he searched for targets. Sarah had a clear shot, but police protocols required her to give a warning before using deadly force, even when under attack. "Police, drop your weapon," she shouted from her concealed position. Instead of complying, the man spun toward the sound of her voice and began firing. Sarah was already moving as the bullet struck where she had been moments before. She rolled behind an air conditioning unit as concrete fragments exploded around her previous position. From her new position, Sarah could see the third attacker emerging from the first stairwell. He had heard the gunfire and was advancing more aggressively than his partners. Now she faced two armed men with automatic weapons, both seeking to pin her down while they maneuvered for killing shots. Rex was crouched beside her, awaiting orders. The dog's dark coat made him nearly invisible in the shadows, and neither attacker had spotted him yet. Sarah made a quick decision that would have seemed impossible to anyone who doubted her partnership with Rex. "Rex, left target, disable," she whispered. The dog immediately understood. He had been trained to distinguish between multiple targets using directional commands. Left target meant the man who had just emerged from the first stairwell. Disable meant to attack without killing unless necessary for survival. Rex moved like a shadow across the rooftop, using equipment and building features for concealment. The attackers were focused on Sarah's last known position, firing short bursts to keep her pinned down while they repositioned for better shots. Neither noticed the dog approaching until it was too late. The German Shepherd hit the third attacker from behind, driving him face-first into the concrete. The man's rifle went flying as Rex's weight slammed him down. This attacker was larger and stronger than the first, and he tried to fight back by grabbing for a pistol on his belt. Sarah used the distraction to engage the second attacker. He was still firing toward her previous position, unaware that she had moved. Through her scope, she could see him clearly as he concentrated on suppressing her with automatic fire. "Drop your weapon now," Sarah shouted again. This time, the man heard her new position and began swinging his rifle toward her. Sarah didn't hesitate. Her training took over, and muscle memory guided her actions. Breathe, aim, squeeze. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the attacker dropped immediately. The shot had been perfect, a center mass hit that neutralized the threat instantly. Sarah felt no satisfaction, only the grim recognition that she had done what was necessary to survive. Police officers trained extensively for such moments, hoping they would never come, but ready to act when lives were at stake. Rex was still struggling with the third attacker, who had managed to draw his sidearm despite the dog's assault. Sarah could see the man trying to angle the pistol toward Rex while fighting to throw off the dog's weight. She had a clear shot, but Rex was too close to the target for her to engage safely. "Rex, clear," Sarah shouted. The dog immediately released the attacker and bounded away from the threat. Years of training had conditioned Rex to respond instantly to emergency commands, even when engaged in combat. The moment he cleared the line of fire, Sarah took her shot. The third attacker dropped his pistol and clutched his shoulder, crying out in pain. Sarah had deliberately aimed to wound rather than kill, choosing a precise shot that would disable him without causing fatal injury. He was no longer a threat, but he was alive to provide intelligence about the Bravettes organization's operations. The rooftop fell silent except for the wounded man's moans and the distant sound of gunfire from other parts of the district. Sarah kept her rifle trained on all three attackers while Rex moved between them, ensuring they remained neutralized. Two were unconscious, and the third was incapacitated by his wound. "Command, this is Overwatch 1, Sarah reported through her radio. 3 hostiles neutralized on the rooftop. 2 unconscious, 1 wounded. I need medical assistance and prisoner transport. Copy, Overwatch 1. Medical en route. What's your status?" Sarah quickly assessed herself and Rex for injuries. Neither had been hit by the gunfire that had been directed at their position. Both operators uninjured. Position secure. Outstanding work. Hold position until backup arrives. But even as Sarah acknowledged the transmission, she could see through her scope that the situation in the district was far from over. The attack on police observation posts had been successful in most locations, and the Bravettes organization was now moving to implement the next phase of their plan. Multiple vehicles were converging on the main warehouse, and Sarah could see armed figures establishing a defensive perimeter around the building. Whatever operation they had planned was about to begin, and most of the police surveillance had been eliminated. Sarah was the only Overwatch position still operational, and her elevated position gave her a unique perspective on the unfolding situation. Through her scope, she could see details that ground units couldn't observe from street level. The main warehouse had been transformed into a fortress. Armed guards were positioned at every entrance, and vehicles had been arranged to create defensive barriers. But, more importantly, Sarah could see civilians being moved into the building under armed guard. This wasn't just a drug operation or weapons transfer, it was a hostage situation. "Command, this is Overwatch 1 with critical intelligence," Sarah reported urgently. "I observe multiple civilians being moved into the primary target building under armed guard. Estimate 15 to 20 hostages visible from my position." The radio traffic immediately intensified as command staff processed this information. Hostage situations changed everything about tactical planning. The priority was no longer disrupting criminal activity. It was saving innocent lives. Captain Williams' voice came through clearly. "Overwatch 1, I need detailed intelligence on hostage locations and guard positions. You're our only eyes on the target." Sarah began a systematic survey of the warehouse complex, using her spotting scope to gather detailed information about the layout, guard positions, and hostage locations. Rex remained alert beside her, continuing to scan for additional threats while Sarah focused on intelligence gathering. Through her scope, she could see that the hostages included both men and women, ranging in age from teenagers to elderly individuals. They appeared to be warehouse workers who had been at the wrong place when the operation began. Armed guards were herding them into a central area of the building where they could be easily controlled. The Valdez organization had clearly planned this operation carefully. They had neutralized police surveillance, secured their primary facility, and now controlled civilian hostages who could be used as human shields or bargaining chips. It was a sophisticated military-style operation designed to give them maximum leverage against law enforcement. Sarah counted at least 12 armed guards visible around the warehouse perimeter, with additional personnel inside the building. All were equipped with military-style weapons and gear, confirming intelligence reports about the organization's capabilities. Command, detailed intelligence follows. Sarah began her report. Primary building has approximately 20 civilian hostages in the central loading area. 12 armed guards on perimeter, estimated 8 to 10 additional personnel inside. All suspects armed with automatic weapons and military equipment. She continued with specific details about guard positions, vehicle placements, and potential approach routes for rescue teams. Her elevated position allowed her to see weaknesses in the defensive setup that wouldn't be visible from ground level. Copy all intelligence. Overwatch 1. Tactical teams are repositioning for rescue operation. Continue observation and report any changes. As Sarah maintained her watch over the warehouse, she reflected on how dramatically the situation had changed. An hour earlier, she had been dealing with skeptical colleagues who questioned whether she and Rex were ready for serious police work. Now they were the only operational surveillance team providing critical intelligence for a hostage rescue operation. Rex nudged her hand with his nose, reminding her of his presence. The dog had performed flawlessly during the rooftop battle, proving that their partnership was effective even under extreme stress. Together, they had neutralized 3 military-trained attackers and maintained their position to provide ongoing intelligence support. But Sarah knew the most challenging part of the operation was still ahead. Rescuing 20 hostages from a heavily defended building would require precise coordination and flawless execution. And from her Overwatch position, she and Rex would play a critical role in ensuring the rescue team's success. The radio crackled with updates as tactical units prepared for the assault. Sarah continued her detailed observation, noting every movement around the warehouse and providing real-time intelligence to the teams preparing to risk their lives saving innocent civilians. Everything she and Rex had trained for was leading to this moment. Soon, they would have to prove themselves once again, this time with 20 innocent lives hanging in the balance. The tactical assault team assembled in a parking garage 4 blocks from the warehouse. Captain Williams had pulled every available officer from patrol duties to support the rescue operation. Sarah could see their positions through her scope, but, more importantly, she could observe details about the target building that the ground teams couldn't see. Overwatch 1. This is Assault Leader. Detective Morrison's voice came through her earpiece. They know we're coming. The radio fell silent for several seconds as the assault team processed this information. Sarah continued her observation, noting that Rex had positioned himself to watch their rear while she focused on the warehouse. The dog's instincts had kept them alive during the rooftop battle, and she trusted him to detect any new threats. Captain Williams' voice interrupted the tactical frequency. All units, be advised that news media are responding to reports of the situation. We need to resolve this quickly before it becomes a circus. Sarah could already see television vans setting up positions several blocks away. The media attention would complicate the rescue operation and potentially provide the Valdez organization with information about police positions and tactics. Time was becoming a critical factor. Overwatch 1. Can you identify the hostage-taker's leadership? Morrison asked. Sarah adjusted her scope to study the individuals inside the warehouse. Most of the guards wore similar tactical gear, but one man stood out. He was older than the others, moved with clear authority, and The other guards deferred to him when he gave orders. Possible leader identified, Sarah reported. Hispanic male, approximately 50 years old, wearing black tactical vest and beret. Located in the southeast corner of the building, appears to be coordinating guard positions. That matches the description of Carlos Mendez, Captain Williams added. He's Valdez's military advisor, former Special Forces. Extremely dangerous. The identification added another layer of complexity to the situation. Mendez wasn't just a criminal. He was a trained military professional who understood tactical operations. He would anticipate police responses and prepare countermeasures accordingly. Through her scope, Sarah watched Mendez organizing his forces. He was repositioning guards to cover potential approach routes and establishing overlapping fields of fire that would make any assault extremely costly. The man clearly understood military tactics and was applying them to defend the warehouse. Assault leader, be advised that hostile leadership is repositioning guards into defensive positions. They're preparing for our assault. Copy. We need to move before they complete their preparations. But, as Sarah continued her observation, she spotted something that changed everything. Mendez was setting up what appeared to be an explosive device near the hostages. If the rescue attempt failed, he was prepared to kill all the civilians rather than surrender them to law enforcement. Command, priority message, Sarah transmitted urgently. Hostile leader is positioning explosive device near hostage location. This may be a dead man's switch situation. The implication was clear to everyone listening. If Mendez felt the operation was failing, he could detonate the device and kill all 20 hostages instantly. The rescue team would have to neutralize him before he could trigger the explosives, which meant they needed to coordinate their assault with precise timing. Overwatch 1. Can you engage the hostile leader from your position? Captain Williams asked. Sarah studied the shot through her scope. Mendez was approximately 600 meters away, partially concealed behind warehouse equipment. The angle was challenging, and there were potential obstructions between her position and the target. But, more critically, she could see that he had something in his hand that could be a detonator. I have a possible shot, but cannot confirm whether target is holding a detonator. If he has a dead man's switch, engaging him could trigger the device. The radio traffic intensified as command staff consulted with bomb disposal experts and tactical advisors. Sarah maintained her watch on Mendez while the debate continued, noting that he was becoming increasingly agitated as time passed. Rex suddenly alerted to something behind their position. The dog's ears perked up, and he focused his attention on the stairwell they had cleared earlier. Sarah kept her scope on the warehouse while listening for any sounds that might indicate new threats. Possible additional hostiles approaching our position, Sarah reported quietly. But, instead of enemies, she heard familiar voices in the stairwell below. Medical personnel and backup officers were finally reaching their position to secure the 3 attackers Sarah and Rex had neutralized. The wounded man would need immediate medical attention, and all 3 would require transport for questioning. Overwatch 1. This is Medical Team Alpha. A voice called from the stairwell. Permission to approach your position? Granted. 3 hostile prisoners secured on the rooftop. 1 requires immediate medical attention for gunshot wound to shoulder. As the medical team worked on the wounded attacker, Sarah continued her surveillance of the warehouse. The delay was allowing Mendez to strengthen his defensive positions, and she could see him moving more explosives around the hostage area. Whatever plan he had, it was becoming more dangerous with each passing minute. Command, hostile leader is positioning additional explosive devices. Recommend immediate action before the situation becomes unsalvageable. Detective Morrison's voice came through clearly. Assault team is ready to move. Overwatch 1. I need continuous intelligence on guard positions during our approach. Sarah began calling out guard locations and movements as the assault team advanced through the industrial district. Rex remained alert beside her, monitoring their surroundings while Sarah focused on providing tactical support for the rescue operation. For guards on the north loading dock, 2 guards at main entrance, 3 guards patrolling east side perimeter, she reported as the team moved closer to the warehouse. Through her scope, she could see the assault team members advancing from cover to cover, using buildings and vehicles to mask their approach. They moved with professional skill, but Sarah knew that Mendez was tracking their progress through his own surveillance network. Assault leader, be advised that hostile leadership is aware of your approach. Guards are being repositioned to counter your advance. The warning came just in time. Sarah watched through her scope as guards moved to ambush positions along the assault team's route. Morrison quickly redirected his team to an alternate approach that avoided the trap, but the delay cost them valuable time. Mendez was clearly a skilled tactical commander. He was using his guards efficiently, creating multiple defensive layers that forced the police team to advance slowly and carefully. But his most dangerous asset was still the explosives positioned near the hostages. Overwatch 1, Captain Williams called. We need you to engage the explosive devices if possible. Can you disable them from your position? Sarah studied the devices through her scope. They appeared to be connected by wires to a central control unit that Mendez carried. Shooting the explosives themselves would likely detonate them, killing the hostages. But if she could sever the connecting wires at the right point, she might be able to disable the system. I can attempt to disable the wiring system, but it's an extremely difficult shot. One mistake could detonate the devices. What do you need to make the shot? Sarah calculated the distance, wind conditions, and target specifications. The wires were thin, partially concealed, and surrounded by innocent civilians. It would require the most precise shooting of her career, with 20 lives hanging in the balance. I need the assault team to create a distraction that draws the guards' attention away from the hostages. And I need Mendez to move away from the detonator long enough for me to engage the wiring. How long do you need? Sarah studied the target area one more time. The connecting wires ran along the warehouse floor between the explosives and Mendez's position. If she could hit them at the right point, she could disable the entire system without triggering an explosion. 30 seconds of clear observation, she replied. But the timing has to be perfect. Morrison acknowledged the plan. Understood. Assault team will create diversion in 60 seconds. Be ready. Sarah made final adjustments to her scope and checked her breathing rhythm. This shot would be more challenging than anything she had attempted in training. But the lives of 20 innocent people depended on her accuracy. Rex sensed her tension and moved closer, his presence providing the calm confidence that had carried them through every challenge. Together, they had proven themselves during the rooftop battle. Now they would prove themselves again when the stakes were highest. 30 seconds to diversion, Morrison reported. Sarah controlled her breathing and found her natural respiratory pause, the moment between breaths when her body was perfectly still. Through her scope, she could see the thin wire that connected the explosive devices to Mendez's control unit. One precise shot could save 20 lives. One mistake could kill them all. Diversion beginning now, Morrison announced. The assault team opened fire on the warehouse's north side, drawing the guards' attention away from the hostages. Mendez moved toward the sound of gunfire, stepping away from the detonator just as Sarah had hoped. This was her moment. Sarah found her target, controlled her breathing, and prepared to take the most important shot of her career. Time seemed to slow as Sarah found her natural respiratory pause. Through her scope, the thin wire connecting the explosive devices appeared as a dark line against the concrete floor. 600 meters away, 20 innocent people sat huddled together, unaware that their lives depended on a single bullet hitting a target smaller than a pencil. Sarah's finger found the trigger as her crosshairs settled on the wire. Years of training had prepared her for this moment. Countless hours on shooting ranges, hundreds of practice sessions with Rex, and months of proving herself to skeptical colleagues who doubted her capabilities. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through her scope, Sarah watched the wires snap and, separate, the severed ends falling harmlessly to the concrete. The explosive devices were now isolated from Mendez's detonator, unable to harm the hostages even if he tried to trigger them. Wires severed, Sarah reported triumphantly. Explosives disabled. The assault team immediately intensified their attack, no longer constrained by the threat to civilian lives. Sarah watched through her scope as Morrison's team advanced on multiple fronts, using coordinated fire and movement to overwhelm the warehouse defenders. Mendez realized his explosive threat had been neutralized and began shouting orders in Spanish. The guards' defensive coordination began breaking down as they found themselves caught between advancing police officers and the loss of their primary leverage. Several guards attempted to flee through rear exits, only to encounter additional police units that had surrounded the building. Overwatch 1. I need target identification on hostile leadership, Morrison called out as his team reached the warehouse entrance. Sarah swept her scope across the building interior, searching for Mendez among the chaos of the assault. She found him near the hostages, no longer carrying the detonator but now armed with an assault rifle. He was positioning himself to use the civilians as human shields, even without the explosive threat. Hostile leader is in the southeast corner, using hostages for cover. Gray-haired male in black tactical vest, armed with assault rifle. Copy. Can you engage if he threatens civilians? Sarah studied the tactical situation. Mendez was partially concealed behind a support pillar, with innocent people positioned between him and the advancing officers. Any shot would have to be precise enough to neutralize him without endangering the hostages he was using for protection. Difficult shot due to hostage proximity, but manageable if he exposes himself. As if responding to her assessment, Mendez stepped from cover to get a better firing position at the advancing officers. The movement gave Sarah a clear view of his upper torso, a target she could engage without risk to the civilians. But before Sarah could take the shot, Rex suddenly lunged to his feet and began growling. The dog was staring at the rooftop access door they had been monitoring. Someone else was climbing toward their position. Sarah spun around to see another armed figure emerging from the stairwell, a fourth attacker who had remained hidden during the initial assault on their position. He was carrying a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, and his target was clearly the assault team advancing on the warehouse below. RPG threat on the roof. Sarah shouted into her radio while swinging her rifle toward the new danger. The attacker was already raising the launcher when Sarah's bullet struck him center mass. The impact knocked him backward, but his finger had already found the trigger. The rocket launched wildly, streaking over the warehouse and exploding harmlessly in an empty lot beyond the building. Rex immediately moved to secure the fallen attacker while Sarah turned her attention back to the warehouse. The rocket launch had been visible to everyone in the area, and it had a dramatic effect on the remaining defenders. Seeing their backup plan fail seemed to break their remaining resistance. Guards began dropping their weapons and raising their hands in surrender. The coordinated defense that Mendez had organized collapsed as individual fighters decided that survival was more important than completing their mission. Sarah watched through her scope as Morrison's team reached the hostages. The civilians were frightened but unharmed, and they began moving toward the exits under police escort. 20 innocent people were going home to their families because of precise police work and coordinated teamwork. Mendez was among the last to surrender. When he realized that his forces had been defeated and his escape routes cut off, he dropped his rifle and raised his hands. Sarah kept him in her crosshairs until patrol officers reached his position and placed him in handcuffs. Overwatch 1. This is Assault Leader. Morrison's voice came through her earpiece. All hostages are secure. All suspects in custody. Outstanding work. The warehouse operation was over, but Sarah's role in the broader mission wasn't finished. Her elevated position allowed her to coordinate the pursuit of suspects who had fled from other buildings in the district. Over the next hour, she provided intelligence that led to the capture of 8 additional Valdez organization members who had tried to escape during the warehouse assault. When backup officers finally reached the rooftop to relieve Sarah and Rex, they found a scene that told the story of an extraordinary engagement. 4 enemy fighters had been neutralized, 3 from the initial assault on their position, and 1 who had tried to use an RPG against the rescue team. None had succeeded in their missions, and all had been defeated by a partnership that many had considered unsuited for serious police work. Captain Williams climbed the 6 flights of stairs personally to debrief Sarah and Rex. When he reached the rooftop, he found Sarah breaking down her equipment while Rex sat calmly beside her, as if neutralizing military-trained attackers was routine work. "Hell of a job up here," the captain said simply. 20 innocent people are alive because of what you two accomplished." Sarah looked up from her equipment. "Just doing our job, sir." "No," Captain Williams replied firmly. "What you did today went far beyond job requirements. You held this position under attack, provided critical intelligence for the rescue operation, and made shots that saved civilian lives. That's exceptional police work by any standard. Rex wagged his tail slightly at the praise. Though Sarah suspected the dog was more interested in the snacks she carried in her equipment bag. For Rex, the operation had been an opportunity to use his training alongside his partner. The life-or-death stakes that had driven human participants were simply another day's work for a dog bred and trained to face danger. Detective Morrison arrived on the rooftop as Sarah finished packing her gear. The man who had questioned her readiness for tactical operations earlier in the day now looked at her with undisguised respect. "I owe you an apology," Morrison said directly. "I was wrong about you and Rex. What you accomplished today, holding this position, providing overwatch for the assault, making that shot on the detonation wire. That's professional work at the highest level." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but she was more interested in getting Rex back to their vehicle for food and rest. The dog had performed flawlessly under extreme stress, and she wanted to make sure he understood how proud she was of his work. The media coverage of the operation focused primarily on the successful hostage rescue and the coordinated law enforcement response. But within the police department, word spread quickly about the Sharpshooter team that had held a rooftop position against multiple attackers and provided the critical intelligence that made the rescue possible. The skeptical comments that had followed Sarah through her early career disappeared overnight. Officers who had questioned her capabilities now sought her advice on tactical operations and specialized training. The partnership between Sarah and Rex became a model for other departments considering similar programs. 6 months later, Sarah received a commendation for valor and was promoted to sergeant. Rex received a police dog medal and a lifetime supply of his favorite treats. More importantly, they were assigned to train other officer dog teams in advanced tactical operations. The Valdez organization was dismantled following the warehouse operation. Marcus Valdez was captured 3 weeks later, and most of his military-trained associates were convicted on federal charges. The intelligence gathered during the operation led to arrests across 3 states and significantly reduced drug trafficking in the region. Sarah never forgot the lessons learned during those intense hours on the rooftop. The most important lesson wasn't about marksmanship or tactical planning. It was about the power of partnership and preparation. She and Rex had succeeded because they trusted each other completely and had trained for exactly the situations they faced. The woman sharpshooter who had been laughed at by some colleagues had proven herself when it mattered most. But Sarah knew that the real victory wasn't silencing the doubters. It was saving 20 innocent lives and showing that effective police work comes in many forms. Years later, when Sarah trained new officers in tactical operations, she always emphasized the same principles her father had taught her as a child. Success comes from preparation, patience, and precision. Size and strength matter less than skill and determination. And the most important weapon any officer carries is the trust and partnership of their teammates. Rex remained Sarah's partner until his retirement at age 9. Together, they participated in dozens of operations, rescued countless civilians, and trained hundreds of officers. The German Shepherd, who had been dismissed as a pretty dog, became one of the most decorated police animals in the state's history. When Rex finally retired to a comfortable life in Sarah's backyard, he was replaced by a young female German Shepherd named Luna. The training cycle began again, but now Sarah approached it with the confidence that comes from proven success. She and Rex had shown that doubters could be wrong, that unconventional partnerships could be extraordinarily effective, and that sometimes the most unlikely teams achieve the most remarkable results. The laughter that had followed Sarah early in her career was replaced by respect, admiration, and requests for training. She had proven that being different wasn't a weakness. It was an opportunity to excel in ways that others might never attempt. And on a rooftop in the industrial district, she and Rex had shown everyone exactly what they could accomplish when given the chance to prove themselves.